In the month of August, we have been gathering in spaces to talk a lot about compassion. In our Sunday services, in religious education spaces, in our UU Connections conversations on Tuesdays, and even in a beta test of the Soul Matters small group materials that we've been doing this month. And by the way, if you've seen things in What's Up or on Facebook about the upcoming Soul Matters small groups, I would recommend that you jump on that because it's a beautiful space of sharing and growing together. We've considered compassion for ourselves, for others, and for all of us together as we embark on a new season, marked by the usual time markers, but wildly new and different circumstances. We've even discussed compassion fatigue. In our last Sunday of this month, I'd like to think together about compassion in a place where it seems to be most lacking, in our politics. I would say that all of our UU principles speak directly to a need for compassion in the ways that we relate to one another politically. But there are two that stand out to me as particularly essential. The second principle, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. And the fifth principle, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large. I suspect that most of you, like me, are fans of the democratic process in general. Honestly, I've been surprised at times to learn that some people aren't, apparently. Several years ago, while collecting signatures on a petition to get early voting on the ballot in the state of Missouri, I came across a few people who were just brutally honest. So one man flat out told me, "No, I don't want to make it easier to vote because I don't want everyone to vote. Some people just shouldn't vote." I was simultaneously shocked that he felt that way and a little bit impressed with his honesty. He went on to ask me why I would want everyone to vote and not just the people who agree with me. To which I responded, because I believe deeply in the democratic process. He was equally shocked at my response. So here's the thing about democratic processes that is both hard and beautiful. They depend on our differences and our disagreements. In Healing the Heart of Democracy, Parker Palmer writes, "Our differences may be deep. What breaks my heart about America may make your heart sing and vice versa. Protecting our right to disagree is one of democracy's gifts, and converting this inevitable tension into creative energy is part of democracy's genius. You and I may disagree profoundly on what constitutes a political failure or success, but we can still agree on this. Democracy is always at risk. It is a nonstop experiment in the strength and weakness of our political institutions, our local communities and associations, and the human heart. Its outcome can never be taken for granted." Somehow, it seems, in recent years, we began to lose our ability to convert the tension into creative energy. And Parker Palmer would say that's a heart problem. When Palmer talks about the heart, he reclaims the Latin root cor, C-O-R, which points to the center or core of the self, the place where all of our ways of knowing converge, intellectual, emotional, sensory, intuitive, imaginative, experiential, relational, and bodily, among others. He says it's the place where our knowledge can become more fully human. Statistically, it's been shown that 15 to 20% of the people on either end of any spectrum of belief simply can't be moved. Palmer is encouraged because he says that leaves 60 to 70% of people who may be willing to engage in dialogue, be willing to learn, and to convert tension to creative energy. The flip side of that, unfortunately, is confirmation of what I've been saying for a while that hasn't been very popular in liberal spaces, which is that fundamentalism is every bit as prevalent on one end of the spectrum as it is on the other. Terry Tempest Williams wrote in her article Engagement in Orion magazine, "In our increasingly fundamentalist country, we have to remember what is fundamental: gravity, what draws us to a place and keeps us there, like love, like kinship. When we commit to a particular place, a certain element of choice is removed. We begin to see the world whole instead of fractured. Long-term strategies replace short-term gains. We inform one another and become educated as a public that responds." So how do we move from this place of intolerance and vitriol to a place where differing ideas are valued and are even exchanged in dialogue that creates space for solutions yet unimagined? Parker writes about what he calls the 5 habits of the heart, with a nod to Alexis de Tocqueville, that American citizens need in response to 21st century conditions. I'll share his 5 habits, which he divides into overarching themes of chutzpah and humility, and also talk about why, as Unitarian Universalists, we may be uniquely equipped to model these habits for the world around us. The first habit he names is, we must understand that we are all in this together. Since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, there have been memes on social media attempting to acknowledge the ways that this virus is no respecter of persons by saying that we are all in the same boat. Criticism of that meme came quickly, with many saying we are not in the same boat. Some of us are navigating these waters in the relative comfort of a yacht, while others are floating around on a blow-up life raft with several leaks, hoping not to get run over by a speedboat. We are not in the same boat, but we are all in this thing together. And what if recognizing the ways that we are all navigating similar challenges, but in very different ways, with very different resources, is a first step toward a compassionate and equitable response? The second habit he names is, we must develop an appreciation of the value of otherness. Otherness is a sociological term that shines light on the ways that majority and minority identities are constructed relationally and institutionally. As fairly progressive people, it seems like we've got this one, right? Inclusion and diversity are in our DNA. But not just that, they're in our governing documents, on the flags that fly outside, and in the songs we sing and the words we say anytime we gather. A UU-style commitment to inclusion is a powerful one. And in fact, it has allowed folks to find a home here when they haven't found a place of belonging in other religious settings. And while it is true that we are much further down this road than many other religious communities, it is also true that we too have a long way to go. We have work to do in moving from acceptance to full welcome and inclusion. We have to keep doing this work in our own community because the world outside our church needs our voice and our leadership in this way as well. And beyond truly developing an appreciation of the value of otherness as it relates to those that our society has often deemed other, we also have work to do to begin to see the value of those who we would consider our political and ideological others. That first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person, is one that calls us to account on a regular basis. But the fact that it is our first principle means that we have a capacity and tools to transform ourselves and our community and to lead in the transformation of the wider community as well. The third habit, we must cultivate the ability to hold tension in life-giving ways. Palmer writes, our lives are filled with contradictions, from the gap between our aspirations and our behavior to observations we cannot abide because they run counter to our convictions. If we fail to hold them creatively, these contradictions will shut us down and take us out of the action. But when we allow their tensions to expand our hearts, they can open us to new understandings of ourselves and our world. This UU faith that invites us to bring the full capacity of our intellect into conversation with our spiritual selves, and the wisdom of many traditions is a practice field for holding tension in life-giving ways. I'm not sure there are people out there who are more eager or well-practiced to create space for conversation, introduce tension around an idea, hold it, turn it over several times to examine it from every angle, debate it, and then agree to disagree over a cup of strong coffee. This mixture of skill, determination, openness, and the art of creating space for it all is a gift that we can offer the world. A world where conversations that involve disagreement of any kind often devolve into personal attack and name calling in a matter of moments. And in the midst of that, we still must engage the fourth habit, which is to generate a sense of personal voice and agency. Whoever you are, whatever your convictions, your level of education, your religious or non-religious beliefs, we need your voice in the conversation. We need you acting on the integrity of your beliefs to make the world a better place for all people. Some of us have seen ourselves more as spectators than participants when it comes to our common life. But it is only our common life if we bring all of who we are into the mix. Some of the most rewarding work that I've done in my life is organizing groups of vulnerable, marginalized people to walk into a politician's office or legislative hearing and identify themselves as constituents and tell the person elected to represent them about the struggles in their lives and how they want to be represented. Time and time again, I've heard in a debrief, I had no idea I was allowed to do that. Every one of us has a voice and the agency to act on behalf of the people and the issues that we care deeply about. We know, without a doubt, that those who disagree with us on those issues are using their voice and their agency, and some of them do so with the hope and expectation that others will not. As UUs who uphold democratic practices, even in our congregational life, we have the ability, and I'd say the responsibility, to help folks discover, claim, and mobilize their voice for good in our communities. And the final habit is that we must strengthen our capacity to create community. We are powerful creatures in our own right, but without a community, it is nearly impossible to amplify our voice in a way that brings change, and it is difficult to maintain our commitment to drive that change when it feels like an uphill battle that we're fighting alone. Even in these times when we are more connected than ever with people in our own vicinity and around the world, studies have shown that isolation and loneliness are pervasive. In fact, a new study using the UCLA loneliness scale showed that loneliness is probably more pervasive than we had even imagined. An astonishing 43%, 2 in 5 Americans, noted that they sometimes or always feel isolated from others and that their relationships are not meaningful. An additional 27%, or 1 in 4 Americans, rarely or never feel as though there are people that really understand and connect with them. Only 53% of participants felt that they have any meaningful in-person social interactions on a daily basis. Friends, we live in a world in deep need of connection, and we have to find ways to make those connections for the good of all of us. Creating community is not an easy task. It takes a lot of hard work and commitment. It means going through uncomfortable getting to know you stages and I'm not sure I like you stages. It means navigating the tension of group dynamics and imagining new ways to be in relationship with one another and creative ways to govern those relationships. But given the history of this congregation, and really probably every UU congregation or fellowship out there, I think we are the people who understand how to build community when there are people who don't fit into the existing community options. A wise person once said to me, if you exist in a place where there's an overarching meta-narrative and an assumption that everyone fits that narrative, you have to create communities that will hold the counter-narrative. Creating those communities gives voice to the counter-narrative and inserts it into the larger conversation. And that is a requirement for the exercise of democracy. And that is the work of our hearts. Terry Tempest Williams writes, the human heart is the first home of democracy. It is where we embrace our questions. Can we be equitable? Can we be generous? Can we listen with our whole beings, not just our minds, and offer attention rather than our opinions? And do we have enough resolve in our hearts to act courageously, relentlessly, without giving up ever, trusting our fellow citizens to join with us in our determined pursuit of living a democracy? This is who we are. This is what our world needs. This is our time.